Hi, everybody. Look alive out there. I was just commenting that it's like an airplane. Everyone's sitting in the aisle seats. Hey, Steve. Hey, Coretta. Thanks for coming. The last session of the day. People are going to happy hours early. Okay. I'm Jesse Morris. I'm the founder and general partner of Difference Partners, which is a venture capital fund that exclusively focuses on investing in the learning and thinking differences space. And I'm lucky to have known everyone on this panel before coming here today. So, at first, we were told not to introduce ourselves, but I actually want us quickly to go around and talk about our personal ties to the learning and thinking differences space. And I'll start by saying that I grew up as a quadruplet. That's how everyone, see, I'm used to getting those reactions. And my brother Paul grew up with severe autism. And for a long time, as my career went into startups and venture capital, I was always really perturbed that startups were solving all these amazing problems, but not for the space that my brother was a part of. And it became very, very clear that we needed to start investing a lot more in this space and prove that you can start a mission-driven fund that are starting companies to improve the lives of those who learn and think differently. So my brother Paul's why I'm here.
Thank you. I've told Coretta, my co-founder, that you're a triplet, so I'm glad that you are correcting me. My name is Bridgette. I was a special education teacher for 10 years and have since left to start a company called IEP and Me. And really, I didn't understand. I grew up one of 5 girls, which gets not quite as much of a response probably, but they're still like, oh,
still cool.
Your poor dad.
Still cool.
But my youngest sister is on the spectrum, and I didn't fully realize what that meant, other than she just got therapies, like OT and speech when she was younger, until I went into the classroom and started supporting students and, writing IEPs and things like that. Similarly to Jesse, after 10 years in the classroom, I saw really cool ed tech and all that kind of stuff, and I was like, why isn't there more stuff for the problems that I'm experiencing? So we'll go a little bit more into that later, but yeah, that's how I'm connected.
Thanks, Bridget. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Orme. I'm the founder and CEO of Creatively Focused. My connection to neurodiversity, I was the 3rd grader doing handstands against the wall, practicing her spelling words because my teacher got me. At the time, it was seen as a deficit. What I didn't know is that they were really harnessing my superpowers that would make me an entrepreneur.
Awesome. And my name is Stefan Bauer. I am the co-founder and CEO of Marker Learning, and we do remote evaluations and support services for students with learning disabilities, and we work with schools and families. My personal tie is I was on track to fail out of school. I couldn't read, and 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, I was in special ed, and teachers told my mom I'd be lucky to graduate high school, and she thought I was brilliant, as all parents do. I don't think I'm brilliant, but she went to the ends of the earth. She paid $10,000 for a learning disability evaluation, pummeled me with flashcards. I have some PTSD from flashcards growing up. But luckily I went on to Yale and worked at McKinsey for a few years, but she passed away before I graduated from Yale, and I'm just always so lucky. I always just think about how lucky I am that she went to bat for me. So much so when I see people with a learning disability in the real world doing something amazing, I'm like, tell me about your mom, tell me about your neighbor. Invariably, there's an amazing person behind their success, which is inspirational to me, but also is sad because 1 in 5 kids has a learning disability, and it's sad that you need a Herculean effort to get you through and reach your potential. So that was really the basis of Marker Learning, and excited to be here today.
Fantastic.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Dan Feshbach. I'm the CEO and founder of Multiple, a autism and neurodiversity innovation hub and accelerator. We are really excited about the companies we're seeing on the stage here, and we're also excited about what we're seeing at the conference. And we've worked with over 100 companies over the last 2 years that have gone through different programming of ours, which is an amazing number. We have a database that tracks over 400 companies around the world, and I bring that to bear. I have a boy, 30 years old, non-speaking, autistic, guy who's an artist, and once he was diagnosed, I started going down a path, helped co-found a school for kids with autism, and co-created something called Teach Town, which now serves about 200,000 kids with autism and other special needs around the country in 2,000 school districts. So I'm taking that experience and trying to give back.
Thank you, Dan. Hey, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Pape, and I head up the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise. And so the boring stuff, my academic background is in reading and literacy, and and this is not as boring. I did start out as a special education teacher, but I had the student, my son, who, you guys would have gotten along in that classroom. So in second grade, the teacher says to me, come on in, you got to watch this. And so she was reading a story, there was circle time, and there's Anthony I shouldn't even say his name, right? Don't repeat this to him. But there he is, he's in his 20s now, doing fine. But there he is under the table with, I don't know how he did this, with both feet behind his neck, right? Rolling. And I'm like, I was sitting out in the hall, and the teacher was like, no, wait a second. And so she went through it, and then she asked him questions. And he, while he's rolling with both of his feet behind his neck, he knew every single answer, totally responded to everything. And so for me, it was like a coming back to work with him after the academic and teaching experience. But I just absolutely love the work that I do at the Learner Variability Project, because we also co-founded the IEP project to bring strength-based whole child IEPs. It's a teacher template co-designed with teachers to the teaching world using our research.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. He's going to help me because I am latently diagnosed as ADHD, hence the notes, so I don't
Can't
talk
wait
too much.
to read your notes and hear you say them.
You got it.
I'm going to get to the first question because intros just took 7 minutes. We've been talking about, and on the door and on this panel, it says here that neurodiversity is an asset, right? And you've heard all of these introductions about how people were personally affected, but also this shared belief that it really is an asset. This is an investable category. So the first question is, by the way, how many, by show of hands, know the organization understood.org or have ever interacted with their content? That makes me really happy. So I work very closely with the organization. I actually sit in their offices in New York, and we spend a lot of time talking about this stat, that 1 in 5 people have a learning and thinking difference. We talk about it every single day. So if it's so prevalent, then why hasn't innovation existed in this space before? Stefan's going to answer first, then we're going to pass it to Barbara second.
Awesome. I think for 2 reasons. I think, one, I think people invest in what they know. I think that's a natural bias. And I think people who have gone through special ed often, especially 20 years ago, who are in that position to invest these days, may not have reached their potential, or they got through and so much scars on their back, they're like, I'm never thinking about that again. I'm going to go and live my life. So I think that's number one, just that exposure. And then secondly, there is a lot of legal ramifications of things, and it's a little bit more hairy than the gen ed population. So just to get up to speed and the barriers to learning is there. But I think now is the time where, oftentimes it represents 30% of a school's budget, despite the fact that it's 10% of this student population. And there's just growing awareness around it. So I'm excited about the future, but I think that's why it's historically underinvested in.
Thanks, Steph. Hey, Barbara.
Just a little bit on a different track, and a little bit is what it will be. And if you want more detail, listen to Linda Darling-Hammond's session earlier today, if you can get it on tape, because historically, the way this all developed was that with a 100-year-old factory model, is these kids the design was to select and to sort. And kids with learning disabilities historically have been sorted out of opportunity, as have kids who are Black, Hispanic, and all other kids, which leads into the concept of average, because historically the way this was working is you taught to the average. I know I heard that. I bet a lot of people at Hero teachers heard that as well. I don't know if you guys heard of Todd Rose's book, The End of Average. That's what we base a lot of our work on, because not only are students not average, there's no human being who's average. And one last thing is that the reason why the innovation hasn't existed, there wasn't technology here for the longest time. I mean, when I started, we were still Xeroxing papers, right? But now you had Kurzweil, and there's such an explosion in technology that I think the time is ripe.
That's a perfect segue to the next question.
Yeah.
So we actually have three former special educators on this panel who are now running software-focused companies in this space. So this next question is for Bridgette and Elizabeth. As long-time former special educators, what motivated you to start technology companies in this space? Elizabeth, you want to kick it off?
Sure, I'd love to. So I mentioned that I was doing the handstands, right? And people go into things that they know. I had a deep passion for making sure that, the things that I felt as a kid, that I knew that I'd be able to help other kids do the same thing. That's part of the reason how I went into special education. When I got there, I spent about a year being a teacher, and during that year, I burned out completely. It only took about 9 or 10 months, and I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. I had a research brain, a data brain. I couldn't stop, right? I was thinking about the next idea that naturally lended itself to becoming an administrator and thinking about buildings and systems. And so I worked as a special education director, and I had a pretty pivotal moment that led me into Creatively Focused. I was sitting at an IEP meeting. I'd felt the burnout as a teacher. I was then hiring people and watching them burn out in the same way that I did. And as I was sitting in that IEP meeting, I was having to tell another parent that they would have a different case manager for their student next year. This was the third time I had to tell that family that they were going to have a different teacher. It feels terrible. It felt terrible as a director. I felt like everybody deserved better. The student deserved better, the family deserved better, but also that teacher who was leaving didn't want to be leaving. Literally use those words with me. I don't want to leave, but I feel like I have to. And I just sat there and I remember thinking, this is it. We need to do something different. These educators need to feel valued. They need to feel like experts. They need to feel connected, and we need to do something about it. And I'm a little impulsive. So off I went, and I started to do something about it. I started thinking about how we were going to make special educators feel empowered in the work that they did so that everybody could get that education they deserved, so that they too could use what they've learned from their own past and impact another child's future potential.
I did not ever think that I was going to be a special education teacher. I left college being like, I'm going to edit novels in New York with my English degree. And I think the only reason that I didn't burn out in my first year as a special education teacher is because I stumbled into it and ended up being a paraeducator, a teaching assistant for 2 years, and then did a teaching residency program. And it was like a gradual release into this role that has so much paperwork and so much, you got to evaluate, you got to teach, you got to co-teach, and all of the things, right? And it allowed me to get my foot as a teacher first. But when I was teaching, there was a pivotal year where I was the only special education teacher in a middle school of 3 grades. So I was in 10 different classrooms, managing 36 different students and their IEPs. And I was like, how do I do this? And the software that I was using to write the IEPs was not supportive to me. It made my life harder. And my general education co-teachers couldn't access it. So I had to tediously figure out how I was going to share all this information. And I ended up working with my students to teach them about their IEPs and do student-led IEPs, because I was like, they need to know, because I'm not there most of the time. And then I had this idea, and I kept teaching because I was like, teaching is my life. Teaching is my career. It's who I am. But then I have a little oppositional defiance in me. And I was like, no one is making a difference here. I need to find a way to work smarter, not harder. And this shouldn't be that hard. And so if no one else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. So I was like, there should be software. There is technology to make this simple and to share IEP information with the people that need access to it. So that's what I did.
Thank you both for taking the risk and following the passion. We talk a lot about these innovations, right? And there are a lot happening. From where I sit, Difference Partners is a $30 million fund. It is our job to invest all $30 million over the next 5 years in innovations in this category. There are some people in this room and on this panel that I'm lucky to be invested in. But for the panel, what current innovations are giving you hope, and what's happening at the school level to support this? Dan, I'm going to kick this to you, because you haven't spoken yet, and you to give Dan just a little bit of a plug, he sits at the top of the funnel of so much innovation that's happening in this space. Dan has seen hundreds and hundreds of companies in the last 5 years especially, but even before. So today, Dan, what's given you hope?
Gosh, this room.
Can you hold the mic?
Sorry about that. Yeah, this room gives me hope. Just the fact that this is on the agenda today, that's a good start. But in general, there's a very lively ecosystem. I mentioned 400 companies that we've identified. I know Jesse gets, we're much more focused on autism and neurodiversity. But if you look across categories, you see amazing work in social emotional learning. One of the companies that Jesse's involved in, Social Cipher, Vanessa Gill is on our board. I see so many young people jumping into this. She'd be a good example. She is an autistic individual. I like that category. I think it should be, it needs to go up and down the age category, frankly. There's a lot of work in at Multiple in that. I'm very bullish about the possibility of obviously artificial intelligence and generative language models. I think that's going to be just a massive thing. I used to write lessons for my boy, and then when we created TeachTown, writing lessons was miserable. We've come up with a way of using the chatbot to actually write lessons very quickly and be able to cover almost any topic. So I'm very excited about that. I think we're going to see a new age of augmentative communication. Multiple is very involved in something called letterboarding, which has been vilified as facilitated communication, but it's a technology. It's really not a technology. We built, myself and two other partners outside of Multiple built this. The letterboard is simply like a large stencil that people who have hard time with motor, hard time of using a keyboard, can point to letters. The people facilitating that are accused of manipulating the communication, which I'm sure has happened. But the net of the day is, I think there's AI times the challenge of communicating when you have apraxia or you have problems speaking. That's big not only for autism, but also for cerebral palsy, stroke, and other areas. So I'm very passionate about that. I think that's a new era. I'm looking for a co-founder for a company in that space. And then I would just add one more thing. If you look at the quantity of innovation going, the quantity and the quality of companies being formed today, it looks so different than when we formed TeachTown. And I guess I have to add one more. Investors like Jesse, the capital markets are starting to move in our favor. When we created TeachTown, I was clinically depressed for quite a while because it was so hard to get this thing going.
I'll make a plug for another panelist here, Stefan at Marker Learning. I met Stefan and invested in his company, weeks after he left a management consulting job and said, hey, I grew up with dyslexia and there's a problem that we really need to solve. And recently, Andreessen Horowitz led a $15 million Series A in the business. And I spent a lot of time with this healthcare team at Andreessen Horowitz, and they had never made an investment in the learning and thinking differences space prior to Marker Learning, which is just going to show you, it goes to show you that even some of these larger, top-tier funds in the United States, we're looking at this space for a long time and are starting to finally now, invest not just a little bit, but a lot bit in it. Barbara, I want you to have a chance to answer a bit of that last question. Yeah. What's happening? I really want to know what's happening at the school level to bring innovation to bear.
Yeah, I wanted to answer that, but taking off on...
Hey, Barbara, the mic's in your lap.
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, I think I actually have the voice that can boom out there, but this is
no doubt,
easier.
No doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. But the growing ed tech and assistive technology field is an area that really is burgeoning now, that wasn't before. And you can see it from talking to teachers and working with some of them with mainly the CAST folks and UDL, right? That there is more use in the classroom of assistive technology. I'm talking mainly in the learning disability space, so dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and an ADHD. There's also, like At the school level, and really everywhere, there's a growing interest in using learning sciences research to actually understand how do kids learn. I mean, before we do anything, we need to understand how do they learn. And you started to touch on this too, including looking at it through a lens of a whole child. So it's not just a student's content area or their or cognition, or that's where attention issues come in. It's also SEL, and I know some people from some states can't say that word, but like raise your hand. Who does not want to learn how to collaborate or build relationships? I mean, this is what social emotional learning is. And it's also student background, right? Our learner variability navigator, for example, if you hover over it, you can see if you have a student who's having challenges with working memory. If you hover over it, we show connections. It could be a phonological awareness issue, which might indicate dyslexia. Guess what? It could also be sleep. And if you've built relationships with your students, you can see, you might know that they have a single mom, wonderful mom, works a night shift. They're responsible for getting their kids out, their siblings out in the morning. Maybe your 4 other people there, or 4 of your other girls, your sisters. And they're exhausted when they come to school, just like any of us are. So it's a little bit different than like it's innovation in the classroom and how people are more open to exploring these areas.
Steph, do you want to jump in on this? I'm feeling you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for innovation, the thing that excites me most actually is not some of the things that are being talked about here. It's the science of reading, switching over, and the phonics-based learning. Because at the end of the day, if you think that if it's out there that 50% of the prison population is like illiterate, let's just tackle that. And I think the science of reading, when you're, we sell to school districts, and we're in Alabama and Georgia driving around, and a lot of the new VR stuff and ChatGPT is kind of seems very far away there, but the fact that they're talking about the science of reading and doing that phonics-based approach, it makes me the most excited, because that's going to work, I think, and that's just a big development since growing up when I was a kid.
Anything you two want to add to this innovation question?
I think at the school level, what we're starting to see in districts is that we're caring about the adults. And that's been a long time coming. We're starting to think about like the adults and the educators as learners. I think we forgot about that for a while. And when we think about someone being excited about the work that they do, and then we also think about all of these students that we're talking about who we would love for them to be teachers, right? And then how do we support those neurodiverse new teachers? And so in the work that we do, when we're working with teachers, we're looking at what is the best way that that adult learns? What is the best way that these different brains working in phenomenal ways can access all of this relevant information so that they can take care of all of the things that they need to do so that they can really focus on the relationships, right? They're there for the students, and so how do we help them to digest the information in a way that works for their unique brains, knowing that we're going to have a lot of these kids who hopefully have wonderful experiences in special education say, wow, I'd really like to be like that one teacher that I had.
The thing that I was always concerned about when deciding to start the fund was that we'd either not have enough high-quality founders starting businesses in this space, right? And then the second problem was that later stage, higher growth firms wouldn't think that the total addressable market was big enough to invest in this category, and I've been proven wrong, thankfully, on both of those. I've seen over 150 pitch decks since starting the firm, and what's been fascinating, as far as I see it, and I know I'm moderating, but I really wanted to answer this question, is what I find fascinating is that there really is a momentum upon each category. So when we first started the fund, it was every autism ABA business, there were like 20 of them overnight that raised, right? Then I saw a ton at the intersection of gaming and ed tech, and we decided to work with Vanessa at Social Cipher. Then saw a lot in the assistive technology space, like you mentioned. So tablets, wearables, things of that nature. Then the evaluations and diagnostic space. By the way, I also learned that screening, assessment, evaluation, and diagnostic are 4 completely different words, which Steph and team and Emily have helped me realize. But it really is just this word hope. I never knew that we'd see this much momentum. There's momentum in the healthcare side of this space. There's momentum in the education side of the space. The Andreessen Horowitz team actually taught me that they really love investing in companies that live in between fields of expertise, right? So the healthcare team and the ed tech team will actually both work together on an opportunity, and then the kind of the leading organization will decide to make that. So I am fascinated by what's happening, not just in education from an innovation perspective, but also healthcare, and then the intersection of the two. Okay. We were just talking about hope. Now we got to go back to the problems, because no businesses ever get started without there being like a really clear core problem. So what problems still exist that we need to call attention to? Who wants to kick this one off? Dan?
I just put an exclamation point on access to everything for people who are non and limited speakers. That is critical. 30 to 40% of the people with autism have that issue, and it's not acknowledged by school districts. It's not dealt with by school districts. It's not dealt with by colleges and universities, and it's a shame, and it's not dealt with by the testing services. So in my opinion, there are really smart people that have to fight in the cracks to get degrees, and they're famous people out there. If you're not familiar with Communication for All, Elizabeth Bonkers and her mom and dad, are doing breakthrough work there. There's a number of organizations that I could cite, but that would be the area that is of need. And then I think we need more investors like Jesse, a lot more investors, and Andreessen as well.
Mm-hmm. There are more. There are more than when we started, but I agree that we need a lot more. Want to tackle the problems question, Steph? What problems still exist, panel, that we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always use this analogy when our parents, my generation, talked about like the good old days, and they drove without seatbelts and drank and drove, and you're like, that is crazy. And it's what does that what is the corollary to today? And I think we'll look back and say 1 in 5 kids learned completely different, and the current education construct generally didn't help them, or didn't have exact beat on what they needed. So I think access to great evaluations, and then access to great services to provide these kids what they needed to help them reach their full potential, because right now I think it's widely known that often the special ed system falls short of what a student is entitled to and fails to reach their potential.
Oh, go for it, Bridgette.
I'm kind of tagging on that. I think there's so many issues that are tackling that, like the education space is tackling in general, that addressing the problems within the special education systems in our public K-12 schools it just feels like one piece of this whole universe of stuff that our teachers and our administrators and our district professionals have to address. So in terms of like companies, yes, I definitely want more funds that are open to and excited about investing in the space. And we need to figure out how can we support the schools and the K-12, but also the public or the higher education, community colleges, four-year colleges to support all the kids, and especially our kids with learning differences, neurodivergence, because a lot of teachers and a lot of college professors aren't necessarily taught how to teach to anyone with a neurodivergence, and the systems aren't necessarily set up for success in accessing companies like our own, implementing them with everything else that they have on their plate.
I want to make this interactive for a second. This is the last session of the day. I want to make sure that people are still awake.
One more comment, Jess, if I could make on
Sure.
issues, and I would just
Sure.
say,
I'm coming back to that, though.
just one quickie in that, and it's not quick, actually. Funding is one thing. Customers is probably more important for a startup. I believe in Multiple is very focused on the idea of speeding adoption, and I'm not sure all the ways to do that. We have ideas we'd love to hear.
Second that.
Yeah.
Third that.
All right, so you're segueing, and I want you to raise your hand. You can be on the panel or in the audience if you're currently selling a product or service to a school district. All right, so it's like the vast majority of the room. Raise your hand if you feel that this process is efficient. Okay. I mean, I think my point of view is that most people here are trying to meet districts and have access to budget, and there are probably a few hundred companies here who have those relationships, and it's not there's not seamless integration, right? There's got to be efficiencies that come here. Do you want to comment on that?
I do, because I'm just thinking about some of the things that we've heard over the last day or so from superintendents and from the K-12 sector. And what we keep hearing is really this piece of like, you can't tell us that it's going to take us, an entire day to implement a product. Don't tell us, that it's going to take a long time for us to get everybody up and running. We need it in their hands quickly. And part of why I think, for us at Creatively Focused, half of our team were former educators. And that helps us out because having been the school administrator that poorly implemented a product that I didn't realize that I was going to have to implement on my own, we're not going to do that. We can't put the added weight of implementing solutions onto district administrators and onto teachers. We have to show them how it's going to immediately create impact for them that's going to make them feel like they're doing less. And I think that, when I think about what problem is existing right now, it's this whole do more with less mentality still exists. It's showing up even post-pandemic, do more with less. And I think we need to just flip the script and say do less with more.
We did a national survey on to American public school teachers and parents, and we asked, this is just about learner variability, but it translates to the point you made before, which is what does a teacher need in order to implement learner variability concepts in the classroom? And all three groups at very high percentages said teachers need more time, support, and professional learning. And I think that plays in here with the ed tech products. I mean, it's really, and as what you were saying before, just to underscore that. And so how do you do that?
All right, we have time for one more question to go around the horn. And we've touched on a bit of this, but what trends are we seeing to support the industry at whole? And the second part of the question is, what's happening beyond K-12? All of these kids are going to graduate, and then what's left? Like, what's there for them then? And Dan, you made a comment before. We at Difference Partners, and I think you too, like to think across life stages. Clearly, our peers in the venture capital industry love to focus on pediatrics because, hey, if you can get a family in the door first, then the LTV is greater. But that's not realistic, right? What happens when they age out? So what trends are you seeing to support the industry, and then what happens when beyond K-12?
Well,
Go ahead.
in the second part of that question, one of the things that we're thinking about at IEP and Me is like, we start with K-12, but as the kids age out into 2-year, 4-year workforce, trade schools, whatever, we transfer that ownership of the IEP to the 18-year-old so that they can then be the owners of it, and they can be the owners of that account and who sees what their accommodations are, and they can share with their professors, their teachers, their bosses, et cetera. So that's one of the things, like, even though K-12 is our primary focus at this moment, like, we are thinking beyond how we support young adults, wherever they end up going, whether it's college or not.
I love thinking about the next generation. I think we're doing so much more being able to support them and understanding what their needs are. And so I very much think about that. Okay, this is a 3-year-old right now, but what happens when they're 25 and making a career decision? And I think there are some really amazing innovations that are happening, as well as just the work is being done. When we're talking about inclusion, we're starting to talk about neurodiversity in that same area. And so there are a lot of companies starting to focus on what accommodations might be fitting. And there are more people self-identifying. So I think as that continues to increase, we're going to start seeing people asking for more and saying, saying, if you want the best out of me, here's the type of support that I need. And so I love thinking about that kind of self-advocacy that's being built from a young age that they then can bring into the workplace, and the great companies that are then supporting the workplace environment.
Yeah, I agree. I think my favorite thing, maybe it's my bias from my mom kind of chirping in my ear, is I think there's just more advocacy from parents and saying, hey, no, my child isn't slow. I want this, and I'm entitled to these evaluations or these services. And I think that actually translates to the world, I guess, graduation world. It's great to see people who are able to label their dyslexia or know what they need and say, hey, I have a processing issue, I need this, rather than, I imagine 20 years ago, it's, I'm slow, right? And that's an entirely different conversation. So that person now is set up for success and can be their own advocate.
Geez, I love the idea of being able to take the IEP or any diagnostic information and package it. It's also a lifetime thing for a parent to know that their child's issues are documented well. So number one, I think it's a great idea. I'd love to talk to you about that. In general, there's a really massive movement in workforce development. I know Jesse's invested in companies like Divergent and others. I think some of the same social emotional learning games we see, we have a small kind of cohort of companies we're working with that are in the social emotional learning for adults. So I think that's happening. There are really interesting businesses there. And I think that, but I think this idea of being able to take a record and move it along through your life cycle and, you know, with some respectful way of maintaining confidentiality is a really great idea. I'm surprised that we don't have a big workforce development presence here. There's so many workforce development foundations and funders and investors in the space. I think we just need to get there next year.
Mm-hmm. So real quick points on that. The first part of the question, what trends are you seeing? One is, and you talked about the science of reading, incorporating research into your ed tech products. And I think we're seeing a little bit more of interest. You might not have researchers on your team, but to reach out and figure that out. We have Kyla in the audience here who's does ed tech on the Learning Variability project, and beautifully. The other thing is co-designing products, because if you can get people who are going to have an impact, who's going to be impacted by what you're developing, not only at the table but really in conversation at the table, you then end up creating products that make more sense for them to be used, and hopefully there is a market pathway for them. I also want to say beyond K-12, I mean, that's a whole nother session. Like you said, well, I'll be here a lot longer, which you probably don't want me to be. But I can tell you, if we do our job right in the K-12, if we can, address strengths as well as challenges, if we can build confidence, if we can create a sense of belonging. Your mom did such a great job. Your mother should be the model for all educators and anyone who touches these kids. Develop self-advocacy skills. I know from personal experience, you go through this with your own kid, you're not sure. But that's what they both tell me work best. They know who they are. Socrates, know thyself. That was a little motto we went through for a while. And then it makes it a lot easier for them in adulthood.
You know what I find fascinating here is that there's connectivity across all of this, right? Early intervention, getting an IEP, getting properly evaluated. The team at understood.org talks about a moments framework, five moments in a kid's life that prevents them from thriving or really thriving, right? Getting a job is just Herculean, how much it can improve the life of someone who maybe didn't have one before. My own brother, we cold emailed, he lives in White Plains, New York, cold emailed an autism research company that needed some clinical help, clerical help, and now he works at the front desk there just from a cold email. So, these things can happen, but they need advocates around them to help, and we need the infrastructure to exist to be able to, get these people in the right jobs when they're available to. We have under a minute left. I just want to thank all of you for coming here on the last day, or the last time slot on the session, and the panelists for being here. This is, as you heard when we started, it's an asset because our hearts are in it.
Beautiful.
This is something that we don't just, we're not here because we're trying to make a buck. We're here because we're trying to prove that we can actually be mission driven and in our professions and actually make a difference in the lives of people and their families. So appreciate all your help. We have 4 seconds left.
Thank you.